So in this video, I'm going to talk about the second characteristic of light, which is light's quality, essentially how hard or soft a light is. Now, sometimes this can be quite tricky to get your head around because the same light source can be harder or softer depending on how large it is in relation to the subject. I'm also going to talk about ways you can modify a light source to make it harder or softer.
So let's now look at the quality of light. Now, as I stressed in the introduction, quality of light comes down effectively to is light soft or is it hard. Now also remember, whilst there are no hard and fast rules, there are general guidelines to what we accept as being normal and how we like things to look. For example, hard light, as we see here in this image of some bloke pushing a great big heavy sled through a gym, hard light suits grittier subjects. It shows off texture, it shows off shape quite a lot. It's very good at giving you a very solid, clear idea of 3 dimensions. Now, by comparison, softer light is smoother and more flattering. Okay. Now, size in terms of quality of light is very, very important. Basically, something that is big in relation to the subject will give you a soft light, and something that is small in relation to the subject will give you a hard light. Now, size matters because of how the light will hit and affect the subject. Let's look at some examples. So here we have our subject, our hypothetical circular thing, and here we have a small hard light. Now obviously, light can only travel in straight lines. Okay, I can't draw straight lines because I'm an idiot, but you get the general idea. So it only travels in straight lines. What that means is that the sides of an object or subject not facing the light will be in shadow. Okay, this side of this cylinder, this ball, is not facing the light. These straight lines of light beams falling are not getting round here, so this area will be in shadow. Okay, because this is only a small light source, it can only see a certain side of the subject. It can't see all the way around the subject. So this area will be nice and bright and this area will be in hard shadow. If we extend the size of the light, we have a much larger light. Well, of course, it still travels in straight lines. We still have some of them that are coming in a straight line like this. Down they come in a straight line. But there are other bits of light that go in straight lines to here and to here and to here. So less of this subject will be in hard shadow. There'll only be an area around here that absolutely cannot see the light at all. And the transition from this deep dark shadow through to the area that's lit, that's obviously our highlight, will be much more subtle because this is much larger. It's easy to think of it, I always find, as if you imagine yourself as the subject and you turn your head all the way around and you can see the light from further round. Whereas, of course, go back to our small light, if you were the subject and your eyes were here, you couldn't see this light. If you turned your face to face out this way, you couldn't see this light. Whereas from here, you could still be looking almost in the opposite direction and still see some of this light. What this does is it creates diffused, not hard shadows, as the light that causes the shadows is actually coming from several different directions. So examples we saw earlier, these are obviously shadows cast by a hard light. In fact, this is a light that I've mounted way up in the ceiling and quite far away, so again distance plays a part, and in relation to the subject it's a very small light. It's almost like the sun. You get these lovely hard shadows and there's almost no graduation at all between areas that are sort of more highlight like this into shadow. You get a very sharp delineation between the shadows. And of course, looking at our other example of softer light, this is lit with a very large softbox, in fact something called a parabolic, which we'll come on to in just a minute, which is actually larger than Tanya is. So obviously this is the lighter area, then it gradually transitions through middle tones all the way through into shadows, but it does so very gently. It doesn't do it in a sudden sharp line as you get with a hard light. Softer light gives you that nice gentle outline, that nice gentle graduation from highlight through to shadow. And if you look at the cast shadows on the back wall, they're very indistinct because, of course, what we've got here is effectively, go back to our big light example, a shadow that can be seen from several parts of the light. You don't have one perfectly cut off dark side of the moon, if you like, area. This whole area can be seen by little bits of light, then lots of light, so the whole graduation is much more subtle. To give you one more real-world example, here is a very large, very soft light. In fact, the same light I used to take this picture of Tanya. This is a 7-foot parabolic umbrella, so imagine that next to a human being. That's very big in relation to them. This, by comparison, is the same sort of light I would have used to take this image, and in fact it would also, like I say, then have been mounted high up in a gantry behind. So this would be small in relation to the subject, so would cast a hard light. This would be large in relation to a human subject and would cast a soft light. Now, I keep stressing in relation to the subject because it is important. Think about how hard the light from the sun is on a cloudless day. That would imply the sun is a small light source, except of course we know full well that the sun is absolutely massive. It's many, many times the size of our entire planet. The reason it's so hard is because it is so far away from us. If we look at this example here, if we have our sun and it's much, much closer than is comfortable to this poor chap here, he's probably going to get fried to a crisp. The light from it obviously is going to come out in straight lines, and it's going to go all the way around our person here. Okay, so we're going to get the typical sort of diffuse shadows you'd get with a soft light. We'll get a gradual fall off from highlight to shadow, because in relation to our subject the light is enormous. Now, of course, obviously the sun can't be this close to a human being. That would be the end of life on Earth. Instead, the sun is, of course, much, much, much further away, and by comparison, if we use a bit of transformation here, it is considerably smaller. Okay, so by now, if we draw the light rays coming in, well, of course, they're only going to reach to here, aren't they? They're not going to reach around the sides of the subject anymore, because this has become a much smaller, therefore a much harder source. So distance does play a part. So before I move on to quantity and then finally colour, I just want to quickly take a step back and talk about relative size and introduce you to things that are generally known as modifiers. We'll start again here with this picture where we left off, where I created a studio inside a golf driving range, and we talked about this thing over here, this parabolic, and this thing over here, which is a reflector, more specifically a zoom reflector. Now, in both these cases, the light inside them is exactly the same size. These are both Profoto heads, and the front of their flashes, the front of the flash is, as you can see, about that big. It's maybe sort of 7 inches across, and the same here, 7 inches across. But then to alter how soft or how hard the light is, you add modifiers. In this case, you put on this reflector, which focuses the light down a little bit, or you fire it into this silver brolly, and then you put diffusion fabric over the front of this silver brolly, and it makes the light very soft. So what starts out as 7 inches wide becomes 7 feet wide. You've modified the light. Now, don't forget, as I stressed briefly in the introduction, there is a multi-million pound industry out there trying to sell you these sort of things. Now, in many cases, they will make your life easier when you're on a shoot, particularly if, like me, you're a professional and you're getting hundreds and hundreds of images a day. However, all these things do is make the light harder or softer, and you'll often find you can do that without spending a fortune, particularly if you understand the principles. So, a very quick run through some of the things you might encounter. Here we have quite a nice range. We have here something called a beauty dish, which is where the light that's inside there will fire into a reflector and back into this dish and onto the subject. We have 2 strip softboxes. Softboxes are very, very common. Softboxes basically have an inner reflector and then a diffusion screen over the front that softens the light. And then down the back here on our 4th light, we have yet again another reflector that's just firing off into this back wall. On this image, we have a nice little range of modifiers. Here we've got our familiar parabolic, our great big 7-foot jobby here. We've got another strip softbox. We've got behind this little sheet of diffusion material, we've got a standard zoom reflector, and then here we've got a beauty dish. Now in each case, all these heads are exactly the same. They're all Profoto heads, they're all 7 inches across, and I've added a beauty dish to this one to make it a certain type of hard or soft light. I've added a parabolic to this to make it a certain type, and so on and so on and so on. But they start out as the same things. Now it's no different when you talk about flash guns, which some of you are quite familiar with perhaps, or speed lights as the Americans like to call them. Obviously a flash gun or speed light is a very small light source. The front of the flash is only a couple of inches wide. But you can put it inside a softbox. Nothing's stopping you doing that at all. You can get all sorts of modifiers now for flash guns and speed lights that allow them to replicate the sort of modifiers you have with high-end flash. What's important to remember though is all you're doing is making the light softer or harder. You're making the light source larger or smaller. You don't necessarily have to buy anything fancy. You can take a flash gun and you can simply aim it up into a white wall or off a white reflector, or you can fire it through some diffusion material. This was taken indoors. I'm behind this, if you like, and my light, rather than coming from a hard, small source of a flash gun, the flash gun is being bounced off the white wall up into the ceiling to create a much broader, softer light. You can go the other way. You can take a fairly soft light. Here we have a beauty dish again, which is about 1.5 feet across, and I've taken what's called cinefoil, which is also known as black wrap, which is very robust black silver foil, sorry, not silver foil, but black aluminium foil, which doesn't let light through, and by channeling down the amount of light that comes through, I've taken what is a soft source and made it harder. So don't forget, all that really matters is how big or how small your light source is. Don't get too trapped into, oh, I must spend a fortune on all this stuff. Not necessarily. It's one thing if, like me, and as this shoot happened to be, I had 10 minutes with somebody, it helps to have all the right kit. You can create almost exactly the same effect by simply bouncing it off a wall or by flagging areas of it off. So don't get too sucked into the trap of, I must spend a fortune.
Okay, that's quality covered in a bit more depth. Don't forget though, all it comes down to is the light the right quality for the shot you want? Is it hard enough, soft enough? Is it doing what you want? If not, can you modify it in some way? Don't fall into the trap of thinking that the answer to your lighting problems is spending a small fortune. As always, it's YouTube, you know what to do. Subscribe, hit like if you like it. If you've got any questions, stick them in the comments, and I'll see you next week when we talk about quantity of light.